Okay, so we're going to talk about a kind of an obscure little bug that nobody's heard of called HeartBleed. Has anybody in here ever heard of HeartBleed? No? Has HeartBleed caused you any heartburn in the last week or so at your jobs? Wow, really? Nobody? Okay. So, where did this thing come from? We all have heard of SSL TLS protocol, right? That's the magic S in HTTPS. It turns your clear text HTTP traffic into encrypted HTTP traffic. There's also another little one in there called DTLS, which is like basically TLS over UDP. Not many people hear about that one. So this whole thing started with an extension to the RFC for those suites, and the Internet Engineering Task Force created RFC2014, otherwise known as the heartbeat extension for TLS DTLS. So why did they need a heartbeat? Well, to establish a TLS connection, you need to do a fairly sophisticated negotiation handshake. And what would happen was, if they didn't have this keep alive method, if there was a lapse in communication, the connection would drop. And so for that client to try to reconnect to that server that it's talking to, it would have to basically go back out, see if it's still connected, see if the connection is live. If not, it would have to renegotiate the entire connection. It's very costly in terms of bandwidth. So some of the things that it does, the Keep Alive provides link level traffic to keep your NATs open through your firewalls and other devices. Like I said, it keeps the negotiated state in place. And it provides a capability for that little known DTLS to do path MTU discovery. So this is how it's supposed to work. It's very simple. It's basically an echo feature. You tell the server, I'm going to send you a string. I want you to send that same string back to me, and that will confirm that we're still connected, we're still alive. So in a perfect world, let me get my pointer here. We've got the TLS client here. They send a heartbeat request to a TLS server that they're connected to, and they send a string and a little value saying how long that string is. So the server receives it, they parse it. The server creates a buffer in memory for that based on that length to get ready to send back the reply. So this is the proper way to use it. However, because of a bug in the code, this is what can happen. If you've got a malicious client, they can specify whatever value they want up to 64K in that field that indicates the size of the buffer. So in this case, they're sending the hello string, which is 5 bytes long, but they're indicating that it's 25 bytes long. So what happens when it gets to the server, it's parsed out, the server's fine. You know, this is a valid SSL record that you're sending me, so I will parse it. They stick hello in memory, but they also save that 25 when they set up the buffer to be sent back to the client. And when they finally finish building that buffer, they basically grab 25 bytes from memory starting at that pointer rather than just the 5 bytes that they should. So they end up sending hello plus an additional 20 bytes from the heap memory that surrounds that pointer in the OpenSSL process space. So that's the bug in a nutshell. There's a pretty good explanation of it down here at XKCD if you follow that comic, but I'll let you go there. So where do the problems start? The problems are obviously in the OpenSSL source code. This is what the RFC says for a heartbeat structure. It's basically just a child of an SSL record. Same thing, you've got a message type, which is the first byte, and then you've got the payload length that you're sending, and then the rest of your payload, which is your message that you send. The RFC further states that the total length of the heartbeat message cannot be greater than 2 to the 14 or 16,384 bytes. That's just standard TLS protocol. They do check in their source code for that value, but it has nothing to do with this bug, interestingly. So we're going to take a look at the source code from the latest vulnerable version of OpenSSL. It's 1.0.1f. So essentially, they incorporated this heartbeat function in OpenSSL as of version 1.0.1, and every version released since then up through F is vulnerable. G, they've just released as the patch version is no longer vulnerable to this. So let's take a look at the code. Hopefully I have it up here. Okay. So this is the function in one of the C files, the C source files of the OpenSSL code that actually digests and parses out the heartbeat requests. So it's passing in just an SSL record. First thing it does here is it sets up some pointers. So we're declaring a pointer, and we're assigning to that pointer the data piece of that request. We have another pointer here, PL. So then we've got type, payload. That's kind of deceiving. So you see it's an int. So that's not the actual payload that's being sent. That's what's going to eventually hold the length value of this, and then some padding. So if we come down here, can everybody see the bottom of that? I can scroll down a little bit. So right here, first thing it does after that is we've got our pointer P, and we're taking the first byte off of that as the type. That's basically saying I'm a heartbeat record. Next thing it does is it moves, this is a macro that's defined in another piece of the code. It takes 2 bytes, the next 2 bytes off of the payload, and that's the length value that the user has sent. And then it puts the remaining piece of the payload into the actual PL pointer, which is the payload itself. So why is that important? What do we always talk about when we code websites or whatever about user input, right? Validation, trust but verify, that sort of stuff. They did not do that here. They implicitly trust the requester to give an accurate length to the request that they're sending. So down here a little bit further is where they set up the return buffer. And what are they doing? Here's the buffer that they've created. This is a pointer. And they're allocating memory for 1 byte plus 2 bytes plus payload number of bytes. So if I sent hello, that would only be 5, and this would be the right size that they're setting up for the return buffer. But if I send 64K there, or FFFF, because you have 2 bytes in order to send it, which is what people are doing to exploit this, you're going to get a lot more back than what you should be getting back. And then further down, they basically send the buffer back to the user after they've built it, and that's why you get that 64K. All right, back to here. So I've heard a lot of discussion about whether or not this is a buffer overflow or a buffer overread. Really, it's none of those. This is really just bad coding. This is a programmer not doing bounds checking, because they are establishing a buffer of X size. They're just taking the word for the user that that's what they need to have back. So what does this all mean? What is vulnerable because of this bug? It's basically anything, any software, any service that uses the OpenSSL libraries from version 101 through 101F.
Not many people use that, right?
No, we'll cover that. How prevalent that is. It's very rare. Yeah, you're probably not going to find it very much. But these are the types of services that you might find that use the OpenSSL code. So obviously your HTTP servers, HTTPS, various mail servers, SMTP, POP, IMAT, chat, XMPP. FTP servers. Anybody use OpenVPN? Yeah, so that's affected too. Various embedded systems, network appliances, and the list goes on and on. I'm sure as the days go by, we're going to hear more and more softwares that are being patched for this. So just keep your eyes open on the patch lists. I don't think we're going to know for some time. Did they? So what else? Would you say? Yeah. Can you turn that off for a second, Dave? I just want to make a comment since we're talking about companies that are jumping quickly to patch their stuff. Okay, so you've probably been reading the slide. What else is vulnerable to this? It's not just servers. It's actually any client software as well that uses the OpenSSL libraries. That's one fact that a lot of people are not discussing. So here's some examples that one researcher found of some client softwares that use the vulnerable libraries. I haven't tested all of these myself. I've tested wget that comes with Kali Linux, and it does not seem to be vulnerable. I have tested curl also, which is a lower version that comes with Kali, and it is vulnerable. So some of these other ones you may want to consider. Nginx, if you're using it in proxy mode. That's the other thing. You know, if you're running, so you'll see a lot of companies saying we're not vulnerable, banks or whatever. It's interesting in the financial sector. I saw no financial sector or company that claimed that they were vulnerable to this. But we have to be careful about this because we'll say that we're not vulnerable because our systems aren't running, but if we have any kind of third-party connections, like Akamai, for instance, if we're running through an Akamai or somebody else that might have been vulnerable, then you by proxy are vulnerable. Outgoing proxies as well. Let's see, what else here? Eggs and mail servers, mobile devices. iOS is not vulnerable, but a lot of the applications that run on it may be compiled with the OpenSSL code. Same thing with Android. Android 4.1.1, Chrome on Android 4.1.1 is definitely vulnerable. And again, I think we're going to see more and more and more. Question?
Can you explain a little more how the client side, like wget or curl, could be exploited?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so it's almost the same as how a client exploits the server. It's slightly different in that it requires a handshake from the client to the server to start with. Once that happens, the protocol is built such that anybody on either side of the connection can send a heartbeat request. So if you have a malicious server set up to receive that connection, you make the handshake, the server can send back the malicious handshake request to the client. Make sense? So, Dave asked the question, how widespread is this? So, only the most popular web servers in the world, Apache and Nginx, they were both compiled to use OpenSSL. According to Netcraft's April 2014 survey, the combined market share of those in the world was greater than 66%, so 2/3 of the stuff that's out there. Some of the operating system distributions that have shipped with potentially vulnerable versions. You can see the list here. It's pretty much all Nixes that you can think of. FreeBSD did have quick updates there after it was released. So they're at 101G now. So what's at risk because of this? Well, as I mentioned, with a malicious request, an attacker can gain 64K of heap data around the OpenSSL process. And they don't just do it once. They can do it over and over and over again. And the researchers who have been experimenting with this have changed some of the parameters to see what's more effective at getting more interesting information. So this is going to be refined over time. You know, once this proof of concept code is out there, people are going to start playing with it and make it better, improve on it, et cetera. So the types of stuff that we can see in that space around the buffer that's created in heap, session IDs, usernames and passwords, sensitive information such as PII, credit card numbers, social security numbers. What about the private key in SSL cert? When this was first announced, there was a lot of skepticism over whether or not this was even possible. And I think it's because the people who were first testing it were looking for the begin private key string. And they didn't find it, so they didn't think it was possible. Cloudflare, very good move on their part. They put out a test server and said, have at it. You know, hackers of the world, have at it and see who can get the key for this. Within 9 hours, this guy here had grabbed the key for that Cloudflare server. This guy started actually after this guy had finished, and within a day or two, he also had the key. So 2 people solved this within a weekend, essentially. Another interesting piece is, today, they've both blogged about how they did it, and they've released their proof of concept code. So I think those vulnerability ratings are going to rise very quickly. So how can we know if we had a vulnerable server what we may have lost through that vulnerable server? And the sad fact is that we don't know because the attack leaves really no trace. Now, some people are starting to set up kind of traffic monitoring. Yes?
One question on the cloud server. Was that like a known plain text attack, or were they actually stabbing in the dark and identified the key without no knowledge of what the key was?
It was a no-knowledge attack. This was a secure SSL TLS server. You know, they didn't go out there looking for begin private key string. What they went out there looking for were primes. So they figured out how to establish, you know, not getting in heavy into the cryptography around it, but these are really smart cryptographic, you know, brains out there working on this. They used the modulus from their own private research to identify primes in heap. So if you get the key primes that are used in generating the key, then you can put it all together in the pieces that you know from the public key and regenerate basically the private key from that, and that's how they did it.
Hey, Doug.
Yes.
There, since they published, we are now hearing that the process is now automated and that the signatures that are on the IDSs, they can go around them at this point in time.
Does not surprise me.
Everybody hear that? So now this is
IDS signatures, though, what you can initially do is look at the full length of the request and then compare that to the size on the actual request itself. So if you have the ability to actually calculate those in your IDS signatures, you should still be okay as long as, because you're grabbing the request length.
The people from Snort have a check out there that checks for that size and flags on that size.
Right.
It can't actually say what the payload is or what the request is or anything. It just
Right, because
flags
that's all
on
inside that
size.
TLS,
So-
connection already. The payload's going to be encrypted, but you can compare the
size of that to
initial signatures are written off of was there was a Python exploit that was released on exploit.db that everybody was using, and basically there was predefined patterns that you can look for that one based on payload. I think there was like 16 bytes that were predictable within it that you could go grab. So.
Yeah, I think Snort issued 4 or 5 full sets, and then they issued an additional 4 or 5 based, I think, on the like. They also said that these guys, when they were doing in order to get to the private key, that they were putting out very large numbers of connections in the hundreds of thousands, or even
In
beyond
millions.
that, millions. So there are some ways to determine just from, you know, common sense and normal normal monitoring.
Yeah, I think people.
paying a lot more close attention to the volume of heartbeat requests than they were a couple weeks ago. So this is going to be an evolving thing over weeks. Like I said, patches are going to keep rolling out. Just keep looking for new patches every day because we're going to find more stuff that's vulnerable. Yes?
Get a shout out to Cisco and WatchGuard too. They released the patch the same day it came out.
Did they really?
Yeah. Pretty sweet.
Does Heartbeat have any other function other than to keep up that link?
For DTLS, it does. It allows
Path MTU discovery for DTLS, which is over UDP. So it needs that function. So people ask, why didn't they, you know, just build it for DTLS and not for TLS? And, you know, it was, you know, kind of rolling them all into one. I don't know.
Since this has only been around for a couple of years, how do we live without this? I mean, I don't ever remember hearing about this being the new features we must implement now that it's available.
I don't know. That's a good question. What's great is that I'm sure this is one of many to come. Especially as we get more and more complex.
I think what saves a lot of companies is they hadn't upgraded yet, right? Or updated to the vulnerable version. We're still a couple versions back.
Yeah, well, if you were a couple
for 2
versions,
years.
if you're a couple versions back,
Yeah,
you're in good shape, right? Because this didn't come out until TLS was implemented in 101. So if
I'm
you're
just
on
gonna stop
101.98, you just stop patching.
Done.
Sometimes that's
We don't need it anymore.
Yeah, so we talked about, we've got HIS, NIS, firewall, we've got all kinds of rules that are coming out for trying to detect the malicious requests. Scanners,
all the vulnerability scanners are implementing their own sort of flavor of this. Just be cautious because in this early week and a half, 2 weeks since this was announced, a lot of the initial proof of concept code that was released was flawed. Even the initial nmap NSE script was flawed. And the flaws were pointed out within a few days, and they started,
improving them as time went on. But a lot of the big name vulnerability scanners, I'm sure, scooped up a lot of that proof of concept code to base their own detection capabilities off of. So I would recommend, if you're going to scan, try to scan with a couple of different tools, not just one, to confirm. I would also recommend not only just service scans, but also do credentialed scans on the box to look for the libraries on the box, because you never know when you're going to have a service that's down when you're scanning, or you're going to have clients on that box that might be vulnerable as well. So upgrade, patch, patch, patch. Just keep checking the patch boards, because there are going to be more as we move through time. Yes?
On your scanning, just one note that came up. It was determined that scanning for this vulnerability on certain firewalls actually causes the firewall to reboot. So,
Ooh, do you know which ones? That sounds like fun.
I believe since they sent the information in the clear, I can't release that it was a Juniper firewall. And they actually at first said, no, this probably isn't possible, but they actually had another customer test it in their lab, and they were able to actually take down the firewall. It actually did a service reboot.
So was this after they had put some sort of a filter on there, or the patch on the firewall?
They had put patches on for the vulnerability, but certain scans on the firewall cause the system to reboot. So be careful with your production firewall servers.
That's surprising, because this is just such a small, it's very
non-complex process. So, yeah, beware of Juniper firewalls, I guess, until they...
just beware of Juniper firewall.
They probably have something out there. I think their mitigation at this point in time is to turn off the SSL service. So. Well, that's
what we were affected by it too. And WatchGuard was affected their SSL VPN, so we shut ours down with LTTP temporarily, until we got operational. And then once they released the patch, we confirmed it, and then rolled that back out SSL to everybody. We're lucky because we're a small company, so creating individualized, LTTP users for each individual person sucks.
All right, so let's move on a little bit. So there are all kinds of patches available.
The way you could patch the actual vulnerable OpenSSL, there are diff patches out there. If for some reason you can't patch or upgrade, you can recompile your version.
While I was in Orlando at Disney World.
Can I shoot him with this?
So I was on, I was literally at Magic Kingdom using my phone to shut down the SSL VPN. So, yeah.
That was day one of your vacation.
That's before everybody started throwing up. So
If you recompile with this flag, don't forget to restart your servers.
Obviously, the next step is revoke and reissue certificates if you've been vulnerable. If you are a company that has a certificate authority, obviously you got to go out to them. You may have to pay some money to do it. I don't know. Does anybody know if any of the big CAs are doing this for free?
Some are.
Some are. Okay.
Yeah, some were doing it free, but then they charged so much to revoke the previous one.
I know GoDaddy's doing it. GoDaddy, they're free. DNS Simple does it for free. Thought, I believe, does it for free. And so there's one other that was reissuing.
So the other issue with that, have you watched the CRO counts?
Yeah. Right.
The other thing is
I can only imagine.
they're putting the same dates on those, so it's hard to tell if they've actually been changed or not. Is what I've seen this morning. That can't be stands, guys.
So that comment was,
Certificates are getting the same dates. The new certificates are getting the same dates, so you can't tell if they've been changed. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Because they purchase them for a certain period of time, and they're replacing them with the same certain period of time.
Oh, okay, so this is the CA making this choice to do that. Okay, a lot of complexity around this. So nobody's had any heartburn around this, huh?
What do you mean, Harper? Why do you think I was late?
So if you are a service provider and you had this problem, please notify your customers so that once you're patched, they can go out and change their passwords or request new certs if they need to.
If you're not patched, let people know here's what's up so that you can plan around it. So we've actually, internal, external, vendor portals, all kinds of stuff. We've actually looked at over 100 different things. You know, and some of the vendors have been much better and clear and transparent, even when they're not completed. Here's what we're doing, here's timeframes we think it might occur. Other ones give these meaningless statements that you can't do anything based on.
Okay, so just going to show just a couple quick demos of what would happen.
So the tools that I've tested here. So, oh, I should mention also, if you use Metasploit, Metasploit has a couple of scanners now. One is a scanner for servers that are vulnerable. The other is a malicious server that will allow you to test clients against that server.
And also all the major ones too, like Nexpose,
Qualys.
Metasploit modules, Nessus,
Yep.
EI, all of them basically updated them. I know all of web application tools too, like NetSparker, updated them. I don't think Burp added theirs. Did they?
Two updates actually.
Well, they did the free update and they did the Pro update, but I don't think they added the vulnerability database wasn't updated for HeartBleed, I don't think. At least most of them have them now.
Actually, the LastPass is nice. So
Oh, yeah, the LastPass one.
Because it gives you like the date of the last update of the cert and some additional information.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to log into this little log server. I just inserted into the code a little kind of session
ID cookie alert here, just so we could see what it is. So it's CNC, FVRM, blah, blah, blah. Wow. So we still have the same session ID there. All right, so now I'm going to go into my tools, and I'm going to hit this with one of the test tools. Not that one, not that one, that one. All right, so I grabbed a little less than 64K here, but hopefully, if we were lucky, we will see right there. Oops, that's an old one. Went too far. Or, wait a minute, was it? Did anybody see what that key was? QFDEQ. Let me check my other server, or my other. I've got to wait for it to say can't find creativecommons.org. Because we have no internet in here. Probably found that out. Okay, time out. Yes. Oh, there we go. So what we'd actually picked up was another client that connected from a remote machine to this, and we're seeing their session ID in the dump of the heap. So what can we do with that? Obviously, we can steal that session ID and hijack the session. So that's just an example of what you can find in the memory. Go ahead with your question.
Doesn't ping do something similar?
Doesn't ping
do something similar.
If I ping you and you reply, could I then determine what operating system or what platform you're on?
Different issue.
Yeah, it's unrelated, but I mean,
It really isn't to determine what system you're on. Is that what you mean? What this HeartBleed does?
It's going to return 64 bytes, and it doesn't need it to use memory. And then it sends that. So I ping, and I say, you must be using Microsoft, or you must be using that, or something like that. I thought that was a possibility of using ping to determine who it is
Scanners like anything can do service identification based on various signatures that it gets back from various types of protocols that we throw at a server, ping maybe one of them, and it sees how it's structured coming back. But it's very, very different here. I mean, what you're getting here is a simple request in server to send back a small string, yet telling it that string is 64K long, so it goes out, finds that pointer in memory, and grabs the string plus 64K minus whatever it was, and gives you that whole dump from 64,000, and not like a few bytes here. And they can do it over and over and over again and vary it so that they get more different pieces of memory each time.
So, like the Canadian Financial Authority, they did it over and over and grabbed credentials and information for 900 people, which, by the way, those people were arrested.
Okay, so here, just as an example, I've got one of the POC chunks of code, and this is actually the POC that was used to base the Metasploit server module off of. So it's listing out 4433 for DTLS clients. And so I'm going to just hit it with curl, just send it something, and you'll see that it dumps chunks of memory. Now, we may or may not see information in here. I've sent other types of curl requests where I've included other parameters, and it does show up in the heap, but it was like very few. I'm sure if you did it over and over again to a client connected with curl, you might find some more interesting stuff in there if they're passing parameters or cookies or something, or using a different protocol. Again, remember this affects not only, but it affects any server that uses the SSL TLS OpenSSL vulnerable version to encrypt their text. So I think that's about it. I'll just open it up to questions.
How did the fix or the mitigation for this problem resolve it, moving forward?
I wish I had some of the fixed code to show you. Essentially, they just put in bounce checking. It was a few lines of C code that they put in there that should have been put in there obviously 2 years ago when this was released. But it was very simple.
Chrome for Android, I saw you said it was Android. Do you know why it's not going on more recent versions? So I think it was more out one.
What I read was that the more recent version was not compiled with the vulnerable.
So they did discover. Well, or I think I've heard Google say that there are some reports that said Google caught this a while back. Do you think that's why Google?
Well, yeah, so discovery, I guess you can credit it to some researchers at Codenomicon and Google simultaneously. I'm not sure how that happens after 2 years. Simultaneous discovery. I have a feeling there might have been some information being shared in the research back channels. But they were both credited with the discovery of it. So yeah, they